You know what's funny about being the galaxy's comic relief? Nobody expects you to actually understand the punchline. My name is Maya Reeves, and according to my employment contract with the Golden Nexus space station, I'm classified as maintenance personnel, subcategory, bipedal cleaning unit. Yes, that's right. In a galaxy filled with 12 different species of sentient crystals, shape-shifting blob creatures, and lizard people who think they're hot stuff, humans rank somewhere between the automatic floor scrubbers and those decorative plants that sing when you water them. The Golden Nexus is what happens when you give a bunch of species with massive egos unlimited budgets and ask them to build the most obnoxiously luxurious space station possible. Picture Vegas, but in space with more tentacles and significantly worse gambling odds. It orbits the neutral zone between 3 major galactic powers, serving as a diplomatic meeting ground where various alien big shots come to stroke their egos and compare the size of their military fleets. And there I was, pushing my little cleaning cart through corridors lined with genuine Andromedan crystal formations, past artwork that cost more than most planets' GDP, while aliens stepped around me like I was part of the furniture. Which, to be fair, I basically was. The hierarchy here is pretty simple. At the top, you've got your apex predators like the Krexnari warrior caste. Picture a 12-foot-tall cross between a Komodo dragon and that guy at the gym who grunts too loudly while lifting weights. Then you've got your tech-savvy species like the Vexthari, who think they're the galaxy's gift to engineering. Below them are your traders, diplomats, and various middle management types. And at the very bottom, slightly above the actual janitorial robots but well below the ornamental fungi, you'll find us humans. It was during my routine cleaning of the VIP quarters that I first encountered Krex Thor the Obliterator. That's actually his real title, by the way. Apparently, when your species conquers 17 star systems before breakfast, subtle names go out the window. He was busy polishing something in what I later learned was his private weapon vault, and I'd accidentally walked in while following my cleaning schedule. The vault was impressive, I'll give him that. Weapons from across the galaxy lined the walls like trophies, each one allegedly capable of turning entire planets into cosmic dust. Krex Thor stood in the center of it all, his massive frame hunched over some kind of energy cannon that hummed with barely contained power. He noticed me immediately, of course. Kind of hard to miss when you're a 6-foot-tall human standing in the doorway with a mop bucket, looking like you've just walked into the wrong action movie. What is this creature doing in my sanctum? He rumbled, his voice carrying that particular tone that suggested he was used to being answered immediately and with great deference. I held up my cleaning supplies. Sorry, sir. Just following my assigned route. I can come back later if you prefer. Krex Thor's reptilian eyes narrowed as he studied me with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for examining particularly interesting bacteria. Then he did something I wasn't expecting. He laughed. Not a pleasant laugh, mind you, but the kind of laugh that suggested he'd just thought of something tremendously amusing at my expense. No, he said, his massive head tilting slightly. I think you should stay. In fact, I believe you've just provided me with the perfect opportunity for a demonstration. And that's how I learned that sometimes being treated like furniture means people forget you might actually have opinions about your own impending doom. 20 minutes later, I found myself standing in the Golden Nexus's main plaza, surrounded by what appeared to be half the station's population, all of whom had gathered to watch what Krex Thor was billing as an educational demonstration of proper hierarchy. The plaza was the kind of ostentatious display of wealth that made you wonder if the designers had been paid by the square foot of shiny surface. Crystalline pillars reached toward a transparent dome that offered a stunning view of the local nebula, while holographic displays advertised everything from luxury accommodations to authentic Earth cuisine. That bore about as much resemblance to actual human food as a plastic flower does to a garden. Krex Thor had positioned himself at the center of it all, his massive form practically radiating self-satisfaction as various species gathered to witness his little show. He'd changed into what I assumed was his formal intimidation wear, armor that looked like it had been forged from the nightmares of extinct civilizations, complete with spikes in places that served no practical purpose beyond making him look like he'd stepped out of a death metal album cover. "Citizens of the Golden Nexus," he announced, his voice amplified by hidden speakers until it echoed off every surface. "Today you witness the natural order of the galaxy made manifest." I noticed Blix in the crowd, a nervous four-armed merchant from the Keth-Lari collective who'd always been polite to me during my cleaning rounds. His upper arms were wringing themselves while his lower arms fidgeted with what looked like a stress relief device that probably cost more than I made in a month. Next to him stood Commander Vex, a pompous Vex-Thari military officer whose idea of casual conversation involved reminding everyone within earshot of his 47 battlefield commendations. "This human," Krexthor continued, gesturing toward me with one clawed hand, "dared to enter my private chambers. While I could simply dispose of such an insignificant creature, I believe there is educational value in demonstrating the vast gulf that separates the apex species from the lesser forms of life." The crowd murmured appreciatively. I caught sight of several species I'd been cleaning up after for months, all nodding along as if this was the most reasonable thing they'd ever heard. It's amazing how quickly people forget you exist when you're the one emptying their trash cans. Krexthor reached behind him and produced his pride and joy, a massive energy cannon that he called the Destroyer of Worlds. The weapon was about 6 feet long, covered in elaborate engravings, and humming with enough contained energy to make the air shimmer around it. According to station gossip, this particular piece had supposedly obliterated the Helix Prime civilization in a single shot. "Behold," he declared, hefting the weapon with theatrical flair, "the pinnacle of destructive technology. A weapon so advanced that entire species have surrendered at the mere sight of it. And yet this primitive creature before us likely cannot even comprehend what she is witnessing." More murmurs from the crowd, along with what sounded suspiciously like polite applause. I was starting to understand why humans had such a reputation for being harmless. When you're dealing with beings whose idea of entertainment involves public humiliation of the janitorial staff, it's probably best to let them think you're not worth the effort. Krexthor began pacing back and forth, his massive feet making the deck plates vibrate with each step. "The human species," he continued, "represents everything that is backward and primitive in our galaxy. No natural weapons, no advanced technology, no psychic abilities, no biological advantages whatsoever. They are, quite simply, evolution's afterthought." I found myself studying the weapon more closely as he gestured with it. Something about its design seemed familiar. The energy coupling looked like a standard Class 7 plasma configuration, and those cooling vents were positioned exactly where you'd expect them to be if someone had reverse-engineered the basic principles from older technology. And so Krexthor announced, raising the weapon toward me, "Let this serve as a reminder to all lesser species of their proper place in the cosmic order." The crowd fell silent, waiting for the show to begin. Blix covered his eyes with 2 of his 4 hands. Commander Vex leaned forward with obvious anticipation. That's when I made a decision that would probably have been smarter to make about 15 minutes earlier. I was getting really tired of being treated like the galaxy's pet monkey. Here's the thing about being consistently underestimated: it gives you a lot of time to think. As Krexthor continued his grandiose speech about human inferiority, my mind drifted back to my previous life. You see, before I became the Golden Nexus's most overqualified janitor, I was Lieutenant Maya Reeves, 3rd engineer aboard the Earth Defense Force vessel Determination. I'd spent 8 years designing defensive systems for humanity's first real foray into galactic politics, back when we were still figuring out that we weren't alone in the universe. The thing is, when humanity first made contact with the galactic community, we made what turned out to be a brilliantly accidental strategic decision. We played dumb. Not intentionally, mind you. We were genuinely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of galactic civilization, the hundreds of species, the technology that seemed impossible, the casual way these beings discussed reshaping solar systems like they were rearranging furniture. So we did what humans do when we're out of our depth. We smiled, nodded, and tried not to break anything important while we figured out what the hell was going on. The other species took one look at us with our single home planet, our primitive fusion drives, and our complete lack of psychic abilities or natural armor, and immediately categorized us as harmless primitives, which, from their perspective, made perfect sense. We didn't have crystal-based quantum computers, we couldn't photosynthesize our own food, and we certainly couldn't shoot energy beams from our eyes. What they didn't realize was that while they'd been evolving these impressive natural abilities, we'd been doing something else entirely. We'd been getting really good at making tools. I studied Krex Thor's ultimate weapon as he continued his theatrical display, and the more I looked at it, the more familiar it became. The plasma chamber design was definitely based on the Mark III specifications we'd developed for ship-to-ship combat. The focusing array looked like someone had taken our targeting system and added a lot of unnecessary decorative elements. Even the power coupling was using the harmonic frequency principles that Dr. Martinez had published in the Journal of Applied Energy Physics 3 years ago. In other words, Krex Thor's ultimate weapon was a fancy knockoff of human military technology. And not even our current technology, this looked like it was based on designs that were already 2 generations out of date. But here's the beautiful part, nobody in the galaxy knew that. As far as they were concerned, humans were the comic relief, the species that somehow managed to achieve spaceflight despite being made of nothing but soft tissue and poor life choices. We were the underdogs, the primitives, the civilization that couldn't possibly pose a threat to anyone. Meanwhile, back on Earth, our engineers were having a field day. Turns out, when you don't have to waste evolutionary energy on growing your own armor plating or developing psychic powers, you can put all your effort into building better tools. And when every other species in the galaxy thinks you're too primitive to be worth worrying about, they tend to leave their technical specifications lying around where any harmless janitor can accidentally stumble across them. I'd been cleaning the Golden Nexus for 8 months now, and in that time I'd inadvertently gained access to technical data from 17 different species, the weapons specifications from the galaxy's 3 major military powers, and enough classified information to probably start my own small war. All because nobody bothers to lock their doors when the cleaning lady is just a harmless human. Krex Thor was still pontificating about the natural order of things, waving his weapon around like it was some kind of sacred relic. The crowd was eating it up, nodding along as he explained how his superior species had mastered technologies that were beyond human comprehension. I looked at that weapon again with its familiar design principles and its obvious structural weak points, and made a decision that was probably going to get me in trouble with about 6 different Earth Defense Force regulations. It was time to stop being the comic relief. "That's interesting," I said, my voice cutting through Krex Thor's dramatic monologue like a knife through butter. The entire plaza went silent, not the kind of respectful silence you get when someone important is about to speak, but the shocked silence you get when the houseplant suddenly starts offering stock tips. Krex Thor's massive head swiveled toward me, his reptilian eyes narrowing with confusion. Did the primitive just speak?" "Oh, I speak," I replied, taking a step forward. "In fact, I speak fluent Galactic Standard, Kethlari Commercial, enough Vexthari Technical to read your engineering manuals, and about 17 Earth languages you've probably never heard of. But what I find really interesting is that weapon you're holding." The crowd began murmuring, a sound like distant thunder that suggested they weren't quite sure what they were witnessing but were pretty sure it wasn't supposed to be happening. Krex Thor hefted his weapon, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "This weapon is beyond your primitive understanding, human. It represents millennia of Krex-Nari technological advancement." "Does it, though?" I asked, my voice taking on the tone I used to use when explaining complex engineering problems to junior officers. "Because from here it looks like someone took a Mark III plasma cannon, added some decorative plating, and called it a day." The murmuring from the crowd got louder. Commander Vex stepped forward, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. Human, you clearly don't understand what you're looking at. I understand perfectly, I replied. What I'm looking at is a plasma weapon with a standard trilithium power core, probably rated for about 15 megajoules per shot, using a magnetic focusing array to channel ionized particles through a titanium alloy barrel. The cooling system is based on liquid nitrogen circulation. And I'm betting the targeting computer uses basic ballistic calculation algorithms with maybe some atmospheric compensation thrown in. Krex Thor's expression was shifting from confusion to something approaching panic. You cannot possibly know those specifications. Can't I asked, warming to the subject now. Because I can also tell you that the power coupling you're using has a harmonic resonance frequency of 432.7 terahertz, which means it's probably prone to overheating after sustained fire. And those cooling vents? They're positioned wrong. You've got them facing the target instead of away from it, which means you're probably losing about 12% efficiency due to backflow. The plaza was now completely silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Blix had uncovered his eyes and was staring at me like I'd just sprouted wings. Commander Vex looked like someone had just told him that his 47 commendations were actually participation trophies. But Krex Thor? Krex Thor was starting to look genuinely worried. Furthermore, I continued, really getting into the swing of things now, that targeting system is using optical tracking, which means it's completely useless against targets moving faster than about Mach 3. And don't get me started on the power consumption. I'm betting this thing drains its entire energy cell after maybe 6 shots, am I right? Krex Thor's weapon arm was beginning to tremble slightly. How could you possibly know that? Because, I said, taking another step forward, I helped design the original. What you're holding there is a cheap knockoff of human military technology. And not even our good stuff, that's based on designs we were using 3 years ago. The crowd erupted into shocked murmurs and what sounded like several different species versions of gasps. I heard Blix whisper something that sounded like a prayer in his native language. But wait. I said, holding up one finger. There's more. You want to know what else I've noticed during my 8 months of cleaning this station? Your advanced environmental systems are based on human atmospheric processing technology. Your artificial gravity generators are using principles that human scientists published in open access journals. Hell, half the food synthesizers on this station are running on modified versions of software that humans developed for deep space exploration. Krex Thor was now pointing his weapon directly at me, but his hands were shaking so badly that I wasn't particularly worried about his accuracy. You lie. Humans are primitives. Everyone knows this. Everyone believes it, I corrected. There's a difference. And honestly, we've been pretty happy to let you keep believing it. Do you have any idea how much easier it is to gather intelligence when everyone thinks you're too stupid to understand what you're looking at? The truth was starting to sink in across the plaza. I could see it in their faces, the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, they'd been underestimating the species that emptied their trash cans and mopped their floors. So here's my question, I said, looking directly at Krex Thor. Are you actually going to use that thing, or are we going to keep pretending it's some kind of ultimate weapon instead of an overpriced garage project? That's when Krex Thor made his biggest mistake of the day. He decided to prove me wrong. Krex Thor raised his ultimate weapon with both hands, the barrel now pointed directly at my chest. The weapon's hum increased to a high whine as power coursed through its systems, and I could see the plasma chamber beginning to glow with barely contained energy. Enough of your lies, primitive, he snarled, his finger moving toward the trigger. Let me demonstrate the true power of superior technology. That's when I did something that probably violated about 12 different diplomatic protocols and definitely voided my employment contract. I reached out and grabbed the barrel of his weapon. The crowd gasped. Blix actually fainted, which was impressive considering he had 4 arms to catch himself with. Commander Vex made a sound that I'm pretty sure was the Vex Thari equivalent of choking. But here's the thing about energy weapons that are based on your own technology: you tend to know exactly where their weak points are. You know what the problem is with reverse engineering something you don't really understand? I asked conversationally, my hand still wrapped around the barrel of the plasma cannon. You usually miss the important details. Krex Thor was pulling the trigger. I could hear the weapon's firing mechanism engaging, could feel the energy building toward discharge. The plasma chamber was now glowing bright enough to cast shadows across the plaza. For instance, I continued, when you copied our Mark III design, you probably noticed that the barrel was made from titanium alloy, and you probably figured that was for durability, which it is. But what you didn't realize is that we use a very specific titanium alloy, one with a crystalline structure that can handle thermal expansion up to about 2000 degrees Celsius. The weapon was now making an ominous whining sound, like a tea kettle about to explode. Energy was visibly crackling along its length. The problem with knockoffs, I said, applying just a tiny bit of pressure to the barrel, is that they usually use inferior materials. And then I squeezed. The barrel of Krex Thor's ultimate weapon crumpled like a soda can. The entire weapon system immediately went into catastrophic failure mode. Energy that had been building for discharge suddenly had nowhere to go, and the weapon's safety systems, which were apparently not nearly as well designed as the original human versions, decided to shut everything down by venting excess plasma through every available opening. What followed was less devastating energy beam and more very expensive fireworks display. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the air above us, creating a light show that was admittedly quite pretty but definitely not the devastating demonstration of power that Krex Thor had been going for. Then the weapon simply fell apart in his hands, its various components clattering to the deck with a sound like expensive junk hitting the floor. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the station's life support system cycling. Krex Thor stood there, holding the twisted remains of his ultimate weapon, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and what I was pretty sure was the beginning of a complete psychological breakdown. That, I announced to the stunned crowd, is what happens when you try to intimidate someone with their own technology. But I wasn't done yet. 8 months of being treated like furniture had left me with a lot of pent-up frustration, and I was just getting warmed up. You want to know the really funny part? I asked, addressing the crowd as much as Krex Thor. Humans have been deliberately hiding our technological capabilities for years. You think we're primitives because we want you to think we're primitives. Do you have any idea how much intelligence we've gathered just by letting you think we're too stupid to understand what we're looking at? I gestured around the plaza, at all the alien faces staring at me in shock. Every primitive human on this station, every janitor, every maintenance worker, every food service employee, we're all gathering data. We're learning your technologies, mapping your defenses, studying your societies. And you've been letting us do it because you thought we were harmless. Krex Thor finally found his voice. But you're just maintenance personnel. You clean floors. I clean floors because it gives me access to every section of this station, I replied. I've been in your computer cores, your communication centers, your weapons storage, your diplomatic meeting rooms. I've seen classified documents from 17 different species, and nobody bothered to stop me because who's going to suspect the human janitor of being a spy? The crowd was beginning to back away from me, apparently realizing that maybe the harmless human wasn't quite as harmless as they'd thought. But here's the really beautiful part, I continued, warming to my theme. This isn't just me. Every human in galactic space is doing the same thing. We're the galaxy's most successful intelligence network, and it works because nobody suspects the species that can't even photosynthesize its own food. That's when things got really interesting because all around the plaza, other humans were starting to step forward. The food service workers, the maintenance crews, the administrative assistants, all the primitive. Humans who'd been invisible background characters in the daily life of the Golden Nexus. And every single one of them was smiling. The transformation was immediate and absolutely beautiful to watch. Marcus, who'd been serving drinks at the Stellar Lounge for 6 months while everyone assumed he was too primitive to understand basic mathematics, but stepped forward and casually mentioned that he held advanced degrees in xenobiology and comparative government from Earth's premier universities. Lisa, the simple human who cleaned the diplomatic offices, revealed that she'd been documenting every classified conversation she'd overheard and had probably prevented 3 separate interstellar conflicts just by making sure the right information reached the right people at the right time. Even Jorge, who worked in waste management and was generally treated like he was borderline sentient, turned out to be a former Earth Defense Force intelligence analyst who'd been mapping the station's entire security grid every time he emptied a trash can. The look on the crowd's faces was priceless. You could literally see the moment when it hit them. They'd been sharing their space for months with what amounted to the galaxy's most effective spy network, and they'd never noticed because they were too busy being condescending. "Here's how it works," I explained, enjoying the way Krex Thor was still staring at the twisted remains of his weapon. "Humanity's first rule of galactic diplomacy is simple: never let them see you coming. When we made first contact, we realized immediately that we were completely outgunned. Hundreds of species with thousands of years of technological development, natural abilities we couldn't match, weapons that could crack planets like eggs." I gestured to the crowd around us. "So we did what humans always do when we're outmatched. We got creative. Instead of trying to compete on raw power, we decided to compete on intelligence gathering. And the best way to gather intelligence is to make sure nobody thinks you're smart enough to be worth watching." Commander Vex found his voice first. "But your technology, your civilization is clearly primitive." "Our public technology," Marcus corrected, stepping up beside me. "What you see is what we want you to see. Earth's actual technological capabilities are, well, let's just say that if we wanted to, we could probably turn this entire sector into a very expensive light show." "But why?" Blix asked, having recovered from his fainting spell. "Why maintain such an elaborate deception?" Because, I replied, "war is expensive, messy, and generally bad for business. It's much easier to prevent conflicts when you know what everyone's planning before they plan it. It's much simpler to negotiate from a position of knowledge rather than strength. And it's infinitely more effective to be underestimated than to be feared." Krex Thor was still staring at his broken weapon, but now his expression was shifting from shock to something approaching terror. You've been watching us. All of us. Studying you," Lisa corrected politely. "Learning from you. Occasionally preventing you from doing something monumentally stupid. Do you have any idea how many interstellar wars we've quietly talked people out of over the past 5 years?" The crowd was backing away now, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. The harmless humans, the comic relief species, the primitives who couldn't even grow their own armor, they'd been playing a completely different game this entire time. "So what happens now?" Commander Vex asked, his 47 battlefield commendations apparently not having prepared him for this particular scenario. I looked around the plaza, at all the shocked alien faces, at Krex Thor still clutching the pieces of his broken weapon, but at my fellow humans who were no longer bothering to hide their competence. "Now," I said, "now we keep doing exactly what we've been doing. The only difference is that you know we're doing it. Oh, and I'm putting in for a promotion. Turns out I'm overqualified for the janitorial position." Within a week, I'd been offered the position of Chief Technology Officer for the Golden Nexus, with a salary increase that was frankly obscene and a benefits package that included full diplomatic immunity. Marcus became the new Director of Cultural Relations, Lisa got promoted to Chief Information Analyst, and Jorge, well, Gorhid decided he actually enjoyed waste management and kept his old job, but now with the official title of Strategic Sanitation Specialist. and a pay grade that reflected his true value to station operations. But the best part: I still clean floors sometimes. Not because I have to, but because I want to. There's something deeply satisfying about mopping up after beings who used to think you were too primitive to understand basic concepts, especially when they keep apologizing for the mess and asking if you need anything to make your job easier. And Krex Thor. He spends most of his time now sitting in the Stellar Lounge, but nursing drinks and telling anyone who'll listen about the day a human janitor broke his ultimate weapon with her bare hands. Sometimes he asks me technical questions about plasma cannon maintenance. I always answer politely. After all, customer service is still customer service, even when the customer used to think you were furniture. The galaxy's a funny place, but humans? We're the punchline that turned out to be the whole joke.